Just want to say a few words first. I just again wanted to thank my colleague Dave Kahn for helping me put together all of these activities we've been doing. It's a tremendous pleasure to see members of our M2E committee like Berghart with us. Everyone's been doing a fabulous job sort of charting the course with this new enterprise in Annenberg. And it's great to see so many other colleagues from the school here as well. Those of you who are joining us from beyond the school, it's a great pleasure having you, and you're in for a real treat today. One of the real conceits behind this program is to give everyone at the school more exposure to some of the practical marketplace concerns of communication businesses. So we try to address that on the comm side of the school, and we're also obviously addressing that on the journalism side of the school. And in several days, on February 8th, we have another great speaker coming to join us, Eduardo Hauser, who's CEO and founder of the Daily Me. So I very much encourage you to come to that interaction as well, because that'll be fabulous. So like I said, one of the main thrusts of the M2E initiative is to give students and faculty members alike more exposure to some of the leading edge issues pertaining to all kinds of traditional and new media businesses. And so one of the main marketplace concerns that Eric's going to talk about are the ways in which the internet has thoroughly disrupted the stranglehold that the traditional companies had on both the supply and demand side of the equation. For many, many years, if an artist wanted to bring their creativity to the public, they had no other means of production, promotion, or distribution other than signing away so many of their rights, if not all of their rights, to these record companies. And we as consumers had little choice to get access to these creations than to go either to the record stores that sold the CD recordings or whatever format the recordings were in, or go to the music clubs that the record companies also owned. So they had this real stranglehold on both sides of the marketplace equation, and then along comes the internet and flips the script entirely. And so now the record companies don't have that kind of that leverage point that they once did. So everyone's trying to figure out, where do we go from here? And Eric's just fresh off a trip to Europe, where he was talking with a lot of the leading lights in the industry about where we're at, where we're going. He's going to share a lot of those insights with you. He's the CEO and founder of what has been described in Wired magazine as the Nielsen ratings for the online music business. He charts consumption across all online platforms. And he's been doing this for at least the past decade. And we were talking earlier, the last time he was here in 2006, music in the cloud had not yet really become anything that people knew about. But he'd already spent at least 5 years sort of proselytizing to the companies, to the dominant companies, about the power of the internet, and trying to impress upon them the fact that their resistance to it would be futile. And so now it's a wonderful moment for him in his business, because the times have kind of caught up to where he already was. And so he's no longer this contrarian voice in the industry, but he's someone who's really speaking a language that everyone wants to hear. So again, I couldn't think of a more just really brilliant person to bring. I also couldn't think of a more generous person. The last time I saw Eric, when he was here, he came to my music industry class mere days after his children had been born. And I was just so struck by that. And I was like, wow, this guy came up, right after that, real milestone moment in his life. But then as a new dad myself, I realized he probably just wanted to get out of the nursery for a few hours. But he has no such, incentive today. He's just really coming to share some jewels of wisdom. So join me in welcoming Eric.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for making time for us. This morning, while I was driving over, I was thinking about 10 years in the music business, and specifically in the business of music online, music on internet, and thinking, God, I still love music, but I gave my youth to this industry that has now, really faced catastrophic. I mean, I can't overstate the the catastrophic downsizing, the destruction that the internet hath wrought on the music business. And I still love music, and I love it now in a new way. I love it as a case study for media businesses, because while I think all online media and communication businesses are peculiar and have their own set of business conditions, and it's wrong to sort of equate music with periodicals, music with book publishing, music with television or film. Nonetheless, many of the big factors that have acted so cruelly on traditional music businesses are going to provide challenges to, and are already providing challenges to, all of those other media verticals. So I really love music 10 years later, 10 years into my journey studying music and the consumption of music by the numbers, because I think there's so much to learn. Music has so much to teach us as people who are interested in or dependent on traditional media businesses. So a quick caveat about the slides. I like to talk about this subject. I could close the laptop and we could have a great discussion that I hope you guys will not be shy about participating in. But I have a lot of slides. I've been collecting data on music for about 10 years now. And so I've put way too many of them in the stack, and that means that I will talk about some of them. I will blow through some of them so quickly that you'll say, wait, I didn't even get to see that. And the good news is I'm told a copy of the entire deck is being kept, and I imagine will be distributed or available to you. So don't be overly concerned about the slides. We're going to pick and choose, because otherwise we'll never get through what I really want to tell you. But I think the first slide, when I talk about media businesses and internet, has to belong to this guy, Clay Shirky. And many of you, I'm sure, have read Clay and have seen the TED Talks and are very familiar with what he has to teach us. But if you have not, I'll first recommend TED.com. Absolutely make a point of giving just a few minutes to watching and listening to Clay Shirky. And because some of us won't actually get around to doing that, I'll do a very poor job of trying to capsule summarize a couple of things that Clay taught me or gave me a framework or a language to use in talking about what's really happened and the forces that have acted, as I said, so unkindly or so cruelly to traditional media businesses. I'm going to interrupt myself to ask, can everybody on the bench and in the back hear me? I have a little laryngitis. I was on the road, as Chris said, and I left my voice in cans. So too much shouting over loud music concerts. But you know, what's been so cruel or so difficult, according to Clay, is that we moved from a world in the 20th century, for the most part, where communication was carried out in two modes, technologically speaking. There was one-to-one communication. A telephone is a great example. I want to share something with Chris, so I call him up and I tell him about it. Now, if that message is going to go any further, Chris has to hang up the phone, pick it up again, dial someone else, and pass it on. Very personal, not very scalable. Of course, you guys recognize one-to-many platforms, radio and television. Very important because they brought tremendous power to media companies in that they allowed us, the very few privileged media companies, to communicate to a great many people all at once, right? So one-to-one or one-to-many. Well, what's happened more recently? You guys recognize these logos. They don't really fit into either mode, right? The 21st century, increasingly, is the domain of conversations among people, conversations in groups, or what Clay calls many-to-many communication. Well, what does that mean to you if you're a traditional media company? Well, in the 20th century, some really difficult barriers to entry in media worked to your definitive advantage, right? It was expensive to share a message. It was very powerful, this one-to-many communication platform, right? Television, radio. If you owned it and controlled it and you could meet the price, you had a cannon. And of course, it was available to you and you alone. There was no competition. So what happens when conversations start, and I'm now quoting Clay, that's over. And I love the way he states this because he's a futurist, right? That's not over. Most of us still watch television every day. Most of us are still susceptible to a song that we don't like the first time we hear it on the radio, but because we can't get away from it, by the fourth or the fifth or the sixth time, we're humming it, right? So it's not over. But Clay's looking 5 minutes down the road, and he says, all of that's over. We're in a landscape where media is global, social, ubiquitous, and cheap. And out of that little bit of what he said in his TED Talk, I gleaned three things, or I was able to frame three observations about the music industry that may well have applications for other media businesses. So the first difficult thing that happened to the music industry is that they started to lose control over broadcast, right? So that Clay's talked about explicitly. When people have choice, when people can choose to listen to Pandora, to participate in Blip FM, recommendations from friends don't just come over the telephone or even in an email. They're posted on a wall for everyone to see. As those influences start to creep in and steal mind share from traditional broadcast, those platforms that made Michael Jackson and led to tens of millions of records sold are still quite powerful. But when Katy Perry is Katy Perry or Lady Gaga is Lady Gaga, Justin Bieber, you don't see tens of millions of anything sold, right? Because the reach and influence has already been diminished. It's not over quite yet, Clay, but it's on its way down. So that's the first thing. We lost the one-to-many communication platform. The second thing is we lost a forced bundle. And nobody knew what I was talking about in the music industry when I came to talk to them 10 years ago about the potential death of the bundle. What's a bundle? Well, they call it an album. We used to call it an LP or a record or a cassette or a CD. But a bundle, right, was a forced grouping of individual pieces of content. So effectively forced as a bundle that we didn't, and the industries that produced the product, didn't even think of it as a bundle. It was a unit. A CD was a unit. That was the smallest increment that in which you could participate in the market, the smallest increment that you could buy. And so in 2000, 2001, on the heels of the original Napster, when we started having conversations about encroaching threats on the bundle, those businesses didn't even know what we were talking about. But clearly, 10 years later, the second thing on my list of three that's had the most catastrophic economic impact on the music industry is the almost complete breakdown of the forced bundle. Meaning, people participate in the music industry in record numbers. More people are consuming more music than ever before in the history of recorded music, by every measure, by the number of songs being listened to, by the number of downloads, by the number of by the number of people who are enjoying music, by the number of songs in your library. There's only one measure by which music is at an all-time low. Dollars, right? So the problem is there was in that bundle a leverage so powerful that, we were laughing about it, Chris and I, when we were kids, if we loved a song, the price of loving that song was $12, $13, $14, $15, $16. It's the price of loving that song. I mean, you couldn't be a card-carrying member of the fan club and not spend that money. I mean, to many of you in this room, I'm speaking Greek, right? I mean, you don't even know what I'm talking about. The price of being a super fan is zero. The price of being a super fan is I go to the YouTube page 10 times a day and hit refresh, right? So because of that, the second big factor in the decline of the traditional music industry is the loss of the bundle. And the third one, which we're really starting to experience right now, is, as Chris described, this shift from music as a product to music as something that we merely access, listen to, participate in. music in the cloud. And what that means, quite simply, is that in increasing numbers and increasing proportion of the time, we may not be owning any of it. We may not be opening our wallets and purchasing any of it. We may merely be accessing it as music flows like water, and with that has come a perceived degradation in the per unit value of music. How much is a song worth to me? Well, a lot of people under the age of, let's say, 30, 35 will just automatically say, at most, $1, right? The most I would ever pay for a song is $1. And so a song and your relationship with that song over the course of your life is worth a lot less to you now than a cup of coffee at Starbucks. And that's profound to those of us who grew up in a different market with a different relationship with music, because one of the things we consoled ourselves with when we were spending big money for very little music was, hey, this isn't a cup of coffee, this isn't a fast food meal, it's not even a movie that I'm going to go see on a Friday night and maybe never think about again. I'm still going to love this song on my deathbed. People who slow dance to some songs at their proms 40 years ago still love those songs. Music had tremendous perceived value. It's not about the actual value of those bits and bytes or even that shiny plastic disc, but what we as human beings think it's worth, what we consider it to be on a par with, and that's changed dramatically. So this is a very bright guy and a friend of mine, David Pakman, who's up here only because, he said something great, but a lot of people have made similar observations. He's up here only because he ran a music service that some of you may know or may remember from the Pakman years called eMusic. And eMusic was a little before its time. It was basically a subscription, a path to the access model for music where the per unit cost of music was quite low. You paid a monthly price to participate in the service, and you could acquire a lot of music. He's no longer in that business. In fact, he's no longer in the music business in any way, shape, or form. He is an entrepreneur in residence at a very well-respected venture capital firm. And his comment is one that when he made it, this is now a couple of years old, was really controversial and was considered sort of, by many people, many of his old colleagues, to be sort of poor sportsmanship, to be in the music industry and then leave the industry and make a declaration about this. This is commonplace today. You hear this observation made more and more. In fact, you don't just hear it in the music industry. You're starting to hear it in the film and television businesses, too. What does this mean, exchanging analog dollars for digital dimes? Well, it speaks exactly to this question of the perceived value of the experience. The fact is, you're very lucky to get dimes on internet, because on internet, and the younger you are, the more this will be true of you, you expect things for free. You expect things for free. You think that the world is awash in content and that there are very few barriers to enjoying, if not outright owning, that content. And so the dimes that Jeff Zucker is talking about are not even necessarily dimes in the jukebox. They're not dimes out of your pocket. They're just fractions of pennies that add up to dimes, that maybe add up to dollars, that are generated as a result of advertising revenue. So, okay, I've talked a lot of doom and gloom already, right? And I'll come back to this question after we make quick work of a bunch of slides. And Chris, if you'll just sort of be the timekeeper and make sure whatever we have allocated, I'd love to have at least 10, 15 minutes just to talk, yeah. So when we get close, let me know. I'll hurry it along. But we'll come back to this at the end, because this question, for traditional media businesses, is the glass half full, half empty? I think you get very different answers to this question based on your age and your station in your career. Meaning, I know a lot of 18-year-olds, I know a lot of 22-year-olds, I even know a lot of 30-year-olds who are pretty excited about their careers in traditional media businesses. Never mind all of those that are very excited about their entrepreneurial pursuits in new areas that they think will take on, combat compete with and maybe replace traditional media. But I know a lot of young people who are excited about the prospects for traditional media. I know fewer and fewer 40 and 50 and 60-year-olds who are excited. And so the glass is half empty if you built a career, built a business, and commensurate overhead based on a set of assumptions about the 20th century, as Clay Shirky described it. The glass may be 3/4 empty if you built that life and built that career and are now facing the things that we see today. So this is retail music by volume. And what you can see here if you squint is that you have to go all the way back to a year before some of you were born. You have to go back to 1990 to get back down to the level that we are today in terms of paid music. You can see this thing that just looks like a huge bubble, right? That's the CD era. That's the money that was generated in the most lucrative years for the traditional music business. And I should say, just as I go through these slides, I'm going to be giving a talk at the New Music Seminar here in town. I'm not plugging it, but because I am previewing some slides that I'm going to show to a larger audience there, I thought I should mention it. That's why they're in the corner there. This is very interesting. Throughout that period that we saw the downside of that curve, where the economics of the music industry started to fall apart, those years actually coincide with this, this sharp uptick in transactions. And what does that mean? iTunes, yes, absolutely. It means that the forced bundle came apart during those years. And so you had people in the trade organization for the music companies standing up and giving press conferences saying, "Music, we're doing great. Music is more popular than it's ever been. Just look at the number of times people buy music. It's up again, year over year over year. It continues to increase." Well, that wasn't lies, damn lies, and statistics, but it was a lot of spin on the ball because those transactions were up. But when the average value of the transaction went from more than $10 to slightly more than $1, you see the difference between transactions and the resulting money. The other thing I should point out is that this is projected out to 2013. Why is it flat or down? Well, we actually got there this year. For the first time, those iTunes purchases didn't grow. People bought music from iTunes and their competitors at about the same rate that they did the year before. And there are a whole lot of theories about that. Replacement cycles, where people are building a library, all the stuff that they had on CD or vinyl. Excuse me. And that comes to an end, right? Eventually, you've rebuilt your collection in a new way. You're not buying at the same rate. But I think there's something to what Chris said. Music in the cloud, access to music, is starting to steal attention away from acquiring even the MP3 files, even the bits and bytes. You might not need them anymore if you can always reach out and hear what you want. In 2006, there were 35 albums released that sold more than 1 million copies in this country. That's platinum certification. Last year, there were 12. 2% of albums released in 2009, we'll have the 2010 figures shortly. They will not look very different from this. 2% of them sold 5,000 or more copies. Now, when I was making music as a kid, we were really proud. We were really excited if we could sell 500 or 1,000 tapes to our friends, right? So recognizing that for most local artists who don't have resources or a marketing budget, it's very difficult to get to 5K. This isn't quite as dire as it looks. There are a lot of people who make music as essentially hobbyists who are content to do that. But given that there are huge multi-billion-dollar businesses built around a dependency on selling well more than 1 million copies, this is incredibly distressing. This is actually an iTunes statistic. So of all the new songs released in 2009, and again, the numbers will be similar for 2010, 50 of those songs generate 1/3 of all the sales. Think about that. That means that I could point to any one of you and guess with stunning accuracy what's in your iTunes library. I mean, we talk so much about the long tail and the blossoming of an independent marketplace and people taking advantage now of all this new choice. But in the end, people are buying, Willow Smith, Whip My Hair, right? People are buying the Gaga track. And I know people are saying, not me, not me. But I know it's in your library. Statistics prove. Again, I'll leave these slides with you so you can look at this in greater depth. But this is just showing that death of the forced bundle. This is the difference in terms of actual purchases between albums, right, and tracks. So you see the tower there, that's tracks. But look, what's happening to the business? Well, here's what's happening to the business. Now the picture is reversed, right? These are the tracks sold. Look at that tower. These are the album tracks sold. These are the individual tracks sold in terms of the money generated by those sales. So it flips on its head, right? People are buying mostly singles, but still most of the dollars come from those relatively few album purchases. And it's all changing very quickly. Because if I were here talking to you 2 or 3 years ago, we would be talking a lot about MySpace. I'm not going to say one thing about MySpace. Now we have to talk about Facebook. And we have to talk about Twitter. And we have to talk about Foursquare. Why? Because the half-lives of these communities in which music thrives and on which we as music marketers become so dependent can be a matter of a couple of years or increasingly a few months. The marketplace just keeps changing beneath our feet so quickly. How did Facebook steal the crown? How did Facebook become the destination for music? I'll just do a minute on this because it's so fascinating to me as a business case study. As those of you who are avid Facebook users, that's got to be just about everybody, know, there isn't really music on Facebook. Facebook doesn't have a music service. Their band pages are pretty Spartan. They're a place to go click the like button, and then maybe you get some information from the artist in your news feed. But it is not a music destination. It is not chock full of music players. It does not have a subscription music service or a paid download service associated with it. But Facebook did a brilliant thing. A couple of years ago, in one fell swoop, on one morning, they changed the entire scheme, the entire foundation of liking something on Facebook. And I don't know if any of us can even remember anymore. You'll have to take my word for it because we've all made this shift with Facebook. But it used to be that the things you liked on Facebook were things that you typed. So in a profile, you'd say, I like root beer, and I like walks on the beach, and I like the Beatles. And it was just that. It was just text. It was just biographical information about you. But in a single day, a little more than a year ago, Facebook changed the rules. Facebook said, if you like it, you have to formally like it. And in fact, when you logged into Facebook on this day, you were presented with all the previous information you'd given Facebook about yourself and about what you liked. And Facebook gave you a choice on that morning. They said, either formally like this by clicking the like button associated with every one of these things, or these things are going to disappear from your profile. Now, I had some privacy concerns about that. So on that morning, I clicked no. And as a result, everything that I'd told Facebook about me up to that point went away because I wasn't willing to codify it the way I do now all day, every day, by clicking the like button. Most people didn't say no. Most people said yes. And so in a day, Facebook amassed the largest database of information about our preferences, including a whole lot of media preferences, movies, television, books, games, music, that had ever been assembled. And as a result of knowing so much about what you like, they became the most effective social music destination without even having a music service. Twitter's up. Pandora. Pandora is experiencing more growth at this moment than in its history, and its history has been a hockey stick up and to the right. So these are our recent stats from my friend Tim Westergren, who runs Pandora. 60 million registered. Pandora is now the majority of all internet radio listening. Now keep in mind, every Clear Channel radio station has an internet equivalent. Every NPR affiliate has an internet expression of that signal. Pandora has more than half the market. I mean, you almost can't say enough about what a category killer this little music service has been. 1 billion stations have been created. This is a really wonky slide, but I just wanted to show. This is total broadcaster revenues. So Sound Exchange is the company that collects monies from all of these services on behalf of the people who own or created the music and disperses that money to them. And this is actually based on their royalty payouts. This is everything in the world that Clear Channel and its competitors have ever done. This yellow piece is Pandora. That's Pandora. So the clouds are gathering. And the reason I say that ominously is that the music companies have had quite an emotional journey, have had quite an emotional arc with the streaming music services, with the cloud services. 2 years ago, the world outside of North America was enthralled by a service called Spotify. How many people in the room are familiar with Spotify? Show of hands, don't be shy. I really want to see everybody who knows. Yeah, this is stunning to me. I'm going to get to tell this story to my colleagues. I was talking to a group of entertainment lawyers a couple of weeks ago, and I asked the same question, how many people know Spotify? And actually, there was not one person in the room who knew Spotify. And I told that story to friends and colleagues in the music industry, and they said I made it up. So I'm thrilled to have another room. You're actually a slightly larger group of people, and so few of you even know what Spotify is. Spotify is bigger than iTunes in most of Western Europe. Spotify is by far the most successful online music service that's been introduced in the countries where it's available. And it was an instant hit out of the gate and amassed millions of users with not $1 of marketing. It was a pure startup. They spent not $1 marketing it. And as a result of internet word of mouth and many-to-many communication, Spotify ate everything that came before it. So what is Spotify? It's an application that looks almost exactly like iTunes. I mean, when you fire it up and you look at it, the interface is immediately familiar to you. It even populates your iTunes library, the music that you have and own. And it's playlistable in exactly the way that iTunes is. But at the top of the application, there's a little search bar. And when you type something in that search bar, Spotify searches the entire world of such collections and all of their store of licensed music and returns results that would amaze you. Trying to stump Spotify is a game in the markets in which the product has been released, because it is truly a celestial jukebox. It is truly, you type it, you hear it, and not only do you hear it, it feels like you have it, because it appears there in your little iTunes library. And so now, everybody's iTunes library is infinite. You still have all the benefits of that software. You still make playlists. It still has a social component. You can still enjoy music locally. You can acquire music. You can buy music. But it almost, for many people, it almost negates the need to do that, because it's everywhere and it also has a mobile device version. So it lives in your pocket and it lives on your laptop and on your desktop. So Spotify changed the world. I love that we ignore these things, by the way. I mean, that I only know about this as an occupational hazard. I think it's so cool that in America we can be so thoroughly unaware.
But aren't they blocked in America?
They're absolutely. Yes, this service has not been deployed in America. Those few of us who know it and love it and try to get access to it from IP addresses that are located in America are now increasingly thwarted. And people are such Spotify fanatics that they even go to great lengths now to obfuscate the fact that they're sitting in a cafe in America, and they use IP spoofing to try to convince Spotify that actually they're somewhere in Europe and should be able to access the service. People are crazy for Spotify. But it's more than 2 years later, and as you point out, Spotify is not available in America. Why? Because music companies have had a huge case of buyer's remorse. Music companies, so excited to see this product emerge and succeed and create such enthusiasm for a legitimate music service, have since learned that Spotify contributes to the death of the broadcast platform, the unbundling, and the decrease in the perceived value of music. So it hits on all of the things that threaten the traditional business. Spotify is available for free to every user. It has an advertising component built in to both the client and the stream. And you can pay for additional functionality and to get rid of the ads. And very low single-digit users choose to do that. And as a result, the music companies who thought, oh, great, they'll fall in love with this experience for free, and then they'll all reach into their wallets, are now learning, again, that on internet, if there is a free alternative, and particularly a legal one that no one's going to come and slap your wrist for using, that people will make do with free. And so Spotify is now fighting for its life because it has to get into North America. And so far has been unable to do so because music companies are so concerned about the further degradation of the value of music. It's been so long that Spotify is going to have company. Google is seeking to launch a similar experience, I guess we can say. They're still in stealth mode, so we don't know exactly what their offering will be, but it's Google, so we know it will be big, and we know it will be presented to us with a marketing budget of more than $1. And of course, Apple continues to make noise and to invest heavily in the infrastructure for cloud media. So what do we have? What is our Spotify today? Our Spotify is called YouTube. YouTube is the #1 music destination in the country. By far, more music is consumed on YouTube than anywhere else. In fact, increasingly, I would say the nearest closest competitor has a quarter, a fifth of what YouTube has in terms of impressions. Are that many people watching music videos? A lot of them are. But no, the real source for that number is the browser-minimized background streaming of audio using a social video destination. Another unintended consequence, something that music companies never even anticipated, that this gathering place where people were putting, funny cat videos up to share with friends would become the largest point of consumption for both listening to and watching music. When the music companies realized what YouTube was, they created a service called Vivo. Now, how many people in the room are familiar with Vivo? Okay, a lot of you. Probably because you see that Vivo logo when you go to YouTube, right? By the numbers, that's true, because 90% of the time, Vivo, which is a proprietary advertising platform to allow music companies to control the sponsor and advertising dollars that support their premium content. 90% of those views are on YouTube. 10% are at vivo.com. So clever in the sense that while the music companies have tried to build their own destination, and that's not a bad share. 10% of YouTube is not nothing. They are also getting paid, and getting paid at a premium CPM rate every time you watch a Vivo-sponsored YouTube video on YouTube. So if you haven't paid attention or haven't seen it, when you're on YouTube and you're watching something that's not homemade, but you're watching a pop star's music video, let's say, look for that Vivo logo and look for the Vivo ads.
When you say the difference between a CPM view and the cost structure, what kind of numbers are you talking about? General YouTube CPM is cost per thousand or advertising rate, per click rate?
Yeah, I mean,
versus Vivo's rate.
they're closely guarding that number, right? Vivo is not sharing that number, but they are absolutely A-list advertisers. I mean, it's Coca-Cola, McDonald's in long-term deals. And my assessment would be that the CPM is probably on the order of 7 to 10 times higher than what they were getting. So, I mean, they really did strike a blow for the per unit value of music. Interestingly, though, one of the 4 big music companies with significant market share, Warner Music Group, chose not to participate. And as a result, their videos in their illegal ad-supported form are not available on YouTube at all, are instead available in a partnership with MTV through MTV.com's video site. So they're standing alone, and all the other majors are on Vivo YouTube. This is fascinating to me just because it tells the, the picture tells the story. This is album sales in a week. This is those song sales. Remember the big tall tower that dwarfed album sales? These are streams from MySpace and YouTube. And in fact, as MySpace has declined since I made this slide, the disparity is actually far greater. YouTube owns it. And that, of course, means that in terms of the numbers, access, what Chris was calling the cloud, is starting to beat acquisition. It's not as important to own the music as just to reach out and hear it or see it. But getting back to that core economic issue, here are some of the numbers, right? If access beats acquisition, why is it that the little download that you can't even see here, why is it that that generated more than $3 million? And that online broadcast streams for Beyonce in the same period generated $5,000, right? The per unit value of music plummets. Getting popular and getting paid are now radically different things. I'll make quick work of this just because I always get asked about Taylor Swift and I get asked about Susan Boyle. Susan Boyle was not popular on the internet. That original viral video that I'm sure all of you saw garnered cajillions of views. But her music, once released, was totally ignored online. Totally ignored. Look at Lady Gaga's 300 million plays to Subo's 133,000. She's just not even on the chart. But look at the purchase behavior. Susan Boyle actually won that race.
Skews older.
So she wasn't absolutely. She skews older. The same market conditions that affect so many of these country albums. You have a buyer who's not perhaps as internet focused, right? So you don't get all of those cheap impressions online. What you get is people walking into Walmart or walking into Best Buy and buying that $14, $15, $16, $17 piece of plastic. So popular and paid are now not only radically different things, but they travel in different circles, right? It's tough to be a young pop star. Okay, so yeah, we'll wrap up. This is just looking specifically at iTunes, where you can see a totally different story, right? I mean, this is clearly the Walmart buyer, the Target buyer, not buying Susan Boyle's download. And then quickly, I'll just show you the other, the elephant in the room, which is the pirate music market. Continues to go up, up, up. This is USA numbers. And in the post-LimeWire world, as I call it, because the record industry has enjoyed yet another victory in their LimeWire case, it's one-click hosting sites, aided by links found on Twitter and found using Google, that allow people to download albums in their entirety for free, more easily than ever before. I'm sure some of you know Drake. His album leaked well before it was even available in shops. And being a young artist and an internet generation artist, his attitude, as expressed on his, in his tweet here, is enjoy it. I hope some of you show up and buy it. I've been giving away free music for years. That's how I built my career. So no judgment implied or expressed. Some artists feel differently. Maybe that's all I'll say about that, about Connie. But just quickly, I mean, to reiterate just how easy this is. I mean, in the case of the Drake album, if you type the name of the album into Google, Google finds it for you immediately. The first hit you get from Google is a pirate site featuring a copy of the album not yet released to stores that is higher quality than what you can buy on iTunes, encoded at a higher bit rate. One-click convenience. You click to get the whole album, not individual songs. And in the end, when we timed it, it was the fastest way to get the album, and not just because the album wasn't in iTunes for another 10, 15 days. So is the glass half full or half empty? Well, this morning, I was going to end on this slide. I guess technically we're still going to end on this slide because I didn't get the last slide in. But as I was having breakfast this morning, a news item popped into my tweet stream. And I thought, how perfect that I will actually be able to make this a real-time presentation with news from the day. There are two reasons I mention this little news item. The first is that it was written by a guy, a friend of mine named Elliot Van Buskirk, who was the music and technology beat reporter for Wired magazine and had a column called The Listening Post for years and was one of the best journalists in the field. Breaking stories, great analysis and commentary. What does Elliot do today? He writes a blog that is owned and controlled by a music technology company, a really innovative company called the Echo Nest, that builds applications primarily for mobile phones around music. So he is an in-house analyst and blogger for a music technology company. That, I thought, says a lot about what's happened to me and to my friends in the last few years. But here's what Elliot writes. Google says, free music as lucrative as paid. The quote from Google is, "These are the traps that people fall into. They look at price tags for ad-supported services versus price tags for subscription and downloading services. But what you really need to consider is not just the price tag, but the scale of the audience and the views that you reach with that." Elliot's comment is, offering something for free drastically increases the rate at which people consume it. It's basic microeconomics, and that's to be expected. We all like free lunch. What's more surprising is YouTube's claim that a well-optimized free music service generates revenue equivalent to that of a paid service like iTunes. So I'll just go all the way back to Mr. Clay Shirky at the beginning and point out that that is not yet true. You ask Lady Gaga's manager whether she made more money from Steve Jobs and iTunes or more money from those hundreds of millions, in aggregate billions of YouTube views, and the big check still comes from the relative few who buy that music at a premium. But perhaps like Clay, what Elliot and the folks at YouTube are doing is looking at the market 5 minutes from now and trying to imagine, how will we ever scale all of this free consumption, this great passion for music that is unrivaled in the history of recorded music? How will we ever scale it economically to replace what's been lost? And I'll end on that. Thank you, guys.
We have 12 minutes or so for questions, if anyone has any questions.
Yeah, please.
You mentioned a couple of things in the talk, and that's okay.
I didn't?
A couple of
Two things?
You were actually quite reticent about the whole music company IP initiative, but also you didn't talk about the other side of the music business, which is the performance business.
Yeah.
And there, the artists, cutting out the music companies again, are doing just great. You know, they're willing to tour.
Well, the numbers don't really support that.
Well,
I mean, the reality is that eliminating middlemen, intermediaries, has been good for some artists in some instances. And to be more specific, superstars have done well by cutting out a lot of these guys that sat in between them and their audiences. Because they can tour. They have a terrific catalog built in some cases over decades that people will want to hear forever. And they don't have to share. And they're also not dependent on third parties for a lot of the marketing and promotion and support that developing artists are. But the problem is, a couple of years ago, that was in vogue to say, look, recorded music is declining. Clearly, artists are going to have to be troubadours. They're going to make their money on the road. They're going to sell merchandise off the table. And the touring business, I didn't show a slide plotting touring industry revenues over the same period. The touring business is in grave decline as well. Half-empty houses, dumping tickets in the marketplace last minute for a fraction of face value. Part of that maybe coincided with a recession that just made it easier for people to stay home. But there was, there was this sort of story that we sold to artists for a brief time in the middle part of the decade that was, don't worry, recorded music, the value of recorded music is diminished and may even be going away, but you're always going to have the road. And in fact, the road is less lucrative than it once was.
At least at the low end. At the high end, it's still makes.
No. I mean, those largest artists, the biggest superstars, are the ones that, in total dollars, saw the greatest decline in touring revenue over the last couple of years.
So what about the other part of Jonathan's question, the IP initiatives that the record label? Did you speak to that at all?
Yeah, I mean, and when you say the IP initiatives, you mean in terms of sort of bundled rights deals and 360 deals and
the RIAA attacking anybody they can.
Oh yeah, sure. Okay, so wow.
I only had 2 of my students last semester who had been sued.
That's good. That's good. That's a better ratio than we had a few years ago. Okay, so efforts.
That was out of 20.
10% is not bad. Efforts to combat piracy, and specifically enforcement efforts, have been far more successful when the trade groups like RIAA or MPAA target the big businesses that enable all of this piracy than when they have targeted individuals. Meaning, the RIAA spent a lot of time suing college kids and their unsuspecting grandmothers and everybody else who got in the line of fire. In the middle part of the decade, 2004 to 2006, they sued 22,000 people in this country alone. They feel, in hindsight, that that was a great deterrent in that it got a lot of attention from the media and sort of gave voice to their concern. But in terms of the actual numbers, reductions in piracy have been overwhelmingly a result of knocking out the big havens for where this occurs. So in other words, when you do manage to take a service like LimeWire offline, that has an immediate and measurable reduction because people simply try to sign on to steal stuff and they can't, right? The problem is that, as I sort of alluded at the end of the talk, and I know we had to go through that quickly, so many things that are even more efficient and in some ways more convenient keep cropping up in the place of those things that are shuttered. So you get this whack-a-mole analogy where everything we put down, 3 more spring up and they're even more virulent. I think that the growth that you saw there in online piracy that I charted is mostly today driven by film and television content. In fact, music piracy is not getting more popular anymore. It was for quite a few years. And that may well have to do with some of their IP efforts, but I think more than anything, it's a consequence of this move from acquisition, and that includes acquisition by theft, to experience or access. So kids who would have been maybe stealing albums or individual songs 5 years ago are now just hitting refresh on the YouTube page 20 times. And so you still have the same volume of impressions. In fact, impressions are up, and they're still free impressions, but they're not black market. There is money changing hands.
Yeah. So the record companies seem to have this kind of split personality now, if I understand the data correctly. On the one hand, financially they're becoming increasingly irrelevant. And yet, at the same time, we were talking about how just a few songs dominate the sales list at iTunes. I assume that that's because they're driven by the marketing machine that these record companies are still able to sort of pull off.
That's right.
So, where, as these guys, and EMI is at death's door, and the market is sort of consolidating, where does that go? Because this other great notion that the internet was going to make everybody sort of accessible and level the playing field for everybody hasn't happened, right?
Right.
There's still people coming from major labels who are getting airtime, playtime, and sales volume.
Yeah. I mean, I think part of it is already starting to be made up by brands and agencies, meaning I think you'll see increasingly pop stars whose only affiliation is sort of Coca-Cola records or, McDonald's. Black Eyed Peas, although they do have a deal with a traditional music company. Yes, they at this point, they wouldn't require one, right? But I also think that what you describe is exactly right in that the hits are getting smaller. We don't have Michael Jackson scoped hits anymore. We have Black Eyed Peas or Lady Gaga. But to get to that global awareness at whatever level you're now able to monetize it, still takes a lot of muscle, still takes an engine. So as these recorded music companies are increasingly diminished, I mean, they employ far fewer people, right? They've gotten out of the distribution businesses they were in. I mean, they're entrenched. I think they will still produce most of the content, if you will, that most of us pay attention to most of the time. In other words, there will always be the big business of music. I just don't think the big business of recorded music is as big as it was.
So it's just going to go to that Pac-Man quote that you said at the beginning. The cost structure is just going to...
Yeah, and they're in the middle. They're in the most painful part of that now, right? Is trying to right-size as businesses.
So it's very analogous to the newspaper industry in that respect.
Very much, yeah. It just won't support the investment that they made 5 or 10 years ago.
Yeah, like the newspaper industry, a lot of the content still comes through that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, people ask me, do you think that the recorded music industry in the form of the big businesses is going away? And I always, my answer is I can't imagine why or how they would. I mean, they're just getting smaller. They're still occupying that same place in the market that they always have. Yeah.
I remember hearing that that artists break even on their concerts and they just use it to market the albums. Did they really break even, or do they make money on those?
No, again, superstar artists make a lot of money on the road. And in fact, when you look at, if you look at the economics of a big brand of a band like, or the Peas or any of these superstar acts, endorsement deals and licensing and millions of dollars off the merch table, that's where all the money is. 50 Cent is a 100 millionaire several times over because of his vitamin water. I mean, in his entire career as a musician, he's made a tiny fraction of what he made when I think it was Coca-Cola acquired his vitamin water company. So yes, I mean, superstars make money in myriad ways that have nothing to do with the sale of these discs or these downloads. But for most artists, in the middle or down the tail, this is catastrophic. The loss of that revenue stream is the loss of the primary stream. And a lot of developing artists are lucky to break even on the road. They lose money on the road. It's one of the reasons that major labels have had to pay tour support for so many of these developing acts, is that you literally can't keep the gas in the van and keep the guy who sells the merch off the table on the road and break even. Yeah?
Radiohead's and Rainbow's album is coming up in my mind a lot, and I was just curious about your thoughts on access turning perceived value into actual value in that case.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so thrilled you asked about that, because it was one of the great pleasures of my career. We were asked by the band and management to partner in that experiment and track it end to end by the numbers. And as a thank you, they also took me to Victoria Park in London and let me stand in the front and see a show. So it really was like my greatest music industry moment. I love Radiohead, but yeah, what happened? That was an early experiment, and it taught all of us a lot. I mean, I guess the headline is, it's great to be Radiohead. You can do a lot of things. You have a lot of options if you're Radiohead and have that kind of rabid fan base worldwide. People did pay. If you guys aren't familiar with the experiment, they released an album called In Rainbows online, and they made it available at a pay-what-you-wish price point. Just put a tip jar on their website. They later released it, much later, I mean as much as a month or two later, as an iTunes album with a regular price point, and then as a physical product with a bunch of different incarnations. So you could spend $200 on a deluxe box set, you could spend $15 on a CD, you could spend $10 on a download, or the first people to get it were the ones that paid whatever they wanted. And a good number of them did pay, and a good number of those who did pay paid a lot, paid more than what Radiohead would have asked for it.
But they, on an average, about $6. $6.
That's right, but you had people, that average.
Over half did it for free.
Exactly.
Did
Well,
that fall straight to the bottom line? Did they have to cut?
over half that participated in the download downloaded it for free. That excludes all of the people that downloaded it from their favorite one-click site or a torrent site, who of course also downloaded it for free. And there were many more of them than participated in the band site at all. So the lesson was, it looked kind of like the marketplace. Most people enjoyed the music for free. Of those that paid, a few of them paid a lot and brought that average up. And a lot of them paid, slightly less than what the retail price for the music would have been. But in the end, Radiohead did very well. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you talk about Pandora, you talk about music recommendation, and there's some companies, Pandora, Econest, music engineering technology kind of companies, which focus on content-based analysis of songs to make recommendations.
Yes.
Where there's some companies like Last.fm that are, that kind of focus outside the Americas, that focus on social networking styles as a recommendation system. So you think about 2 or 3 years now, is I come from an engineering background focusing on music recommendations and things like that. What direction do you think that the recommendation system is heading? Content-based kind of thing, or the social network?
Yeah, what's interesting is that in this, in this realm of things that we call imprecisely, that we call discovery or recommendation or like music, there are a whole lot of different product experiences. And I think, one thing that Pandora has demonstrated is that in a purely passive mode as a listener, right? As a Pandora listener, you create a station and then you're just listening to the radio. In a purely passive mode, their programmers, because that's really what they are, I don't mean programmers as in developers, I mean programmers as in traditional radio programmers, their programmers have done very well in the sense that they create stations that feel right and that tend not to be too disruptive and that meet that need for someone who's maybe listening with one ear. The active participant in let's say, a social music experience, I think is clearly heavily influenced by the source for the recommendation, and that's where social becomes so important. And you'll even hear people say, I don't want a machine telling me it thinks that I'll like this, because I've got friends with great taste in music and they know what I like. So I think it's very contextual. I know so many people who are passionate adherents to the Last.fm scheme, and so many others who are, equally committed to Pandora, and then people who say, no, Econest by far does the best work. That, what's clear to me as it shakes out is that there are viable audiences for all of these things, and all of these approaches seem to have real market applications. I don't expect, as I think we did early on, for it to be a big bake-off where a blue ribbon is awarded and someone sort of emerges victorious as the ultimate source for recommendation or discovery. I think all of these things have their place in the market.
Well, real quickly before we close out, just leave time for people to mingle with you afterwards if they have other questions. Do you want to say a few words about Ultimate Chart?
Oh, sure. Yeah. What we're doing now, what my company is doing now, we've been collecting information about all of the ways in which music is enjoyed and consumed and exploited across all channels. And in recent years, we've expanded that. We started, of course, with an online focus. We've expanded our mandate to include traditional retail, traditional radio broadcast, use of music in film and television, all of the different social music experiences that we've alluded to. And so we think that we are in possession of, increasingly, a relatively comprehensive view of where music is popular and how and why. And so we've created a sort of consumer-facing expression of that. And we'll be announcing some syndication, some traditional syndication deals that will put this stuff on the web and in print where consumers will see it. But we've created a platform called Ultimate Chart, and it now resides at ultimatechart.com. And it's literally that. It's an amalgamation of all the ways in which people experience music and ranked list of popular artists and songs based on not any one thing, not just based on online video views or just based on radio airplay or just based on iTunes sales or Best Buy sales, but all of it. And we've weighted all of these impressions based on the associated revenue, or the closest approximation that we could get to, in order to say, okay, this transaction was worth $1 or was worth 70 cents wholesale. This transaction was worth 4/100ths of 1 penny. And when you then merge all of those data sets and weight them relative to one another, you start to get a new lens for looking at popular music. And so that's what I'm focused on now.
Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.